woman. I love her. She's just incredible. This week, we are talking about Esther. And if you notice, we're still in my dorm room, even though I have already moved out of my dorm room by the time this is airing. I'm in Israel right now. At the time that this premiered, like the time that this airs for the first time, it is currently 1 o'clock in the morning in Israel. I'm asleep. I'm not filming this while I'm in Israel because I simply don't have time. So we're still in my dorm room for this week and for next week because I will still be in Israel next week. And then after that, theoretically, we're going to be back we're actually going to be at the set at my church because this is all going to be taken down, which is really sad. I like this set. But eventually you're going to have a brand new set in a brand new dorm room with brand new friends that I will be forcing to come on the show with me. Very exciting stuff. So, we have a lot to cover this episode. Esther is just a fascinating woman. I think I could do several episodes going through this entire book. Obviously, I will not be reading all 10 chapters of Esther for you today, so I have a summary, which is honestly really long in and of itself, but we're going to do our best. I was on my Mountain Dew because I love Mountain Dew. And it matches the color scheme. I don't know why everything's blue today. It's just where we're at. The school colors. All right, let's get into this. So, the king of Persia is holding feasts to show off how great he is. Very drunk, because that's a common theme. Everybody gets drunk all the time. So while he's drunk, he orders his wife to come in so he can show off how pretty she is. And she refuses because gross. So as a very normal response to this, he divorces her and decides that all Persian men should be the masters of their house. And then, because he's now down a wife, he decides, oh, let's hold a beauty pageant so I can replace her with whoever the prettiest woman is. This is where we meet Esther. So Esther was an orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai. They decide that she should enter the beauty pageant disguised so that they don't know she's Jewish. And so she does, and she wins. So King is completely obsessed with her, and he makes her his queen, immediately. Mordecai, while this is happening, overhears a couple people talking about their plot to kill the king. So he tells Esther, Esther tells the king, and Mordecai gets the credit for saving the king's life, which, okay, fair enough. Okay, new character, Haman. Haman is an Agagite, which is they're descendants of the Canaanites. So Haman is elevated to the highest position in the kingdom, and it is ordered that everybody kneels before him. And Mordecai's like, no, not happening. So Haman gets really mad. And so he finds out that Mordecai is Jewish, and in a very rational and well thought out response to Mordecai not kneeling, he decides to kill all of the Jews. I have anger issues, but they're not genocidal. So I feel like I'm doing kind of okay. Anyways, so he decides to convince the king to commit genocide. And in order to decide the date to kill all of these people, he rolls a dice. So it's decided the 13th of Adar, all the Jews will die. And then the king and Haman, naturally, have a banquet to celebrate genocide. It's great. We love these people. So Esther and Mordecai, hearing about this, decide to plan to have Esther reveal her Jewish identity to the king to convince him to reverse the decree. But approaching the king without a request from him is an act that could kill you, so Mordecai decides, well, even despite that, Mordecai decides that if Esther remains silent, deliverance for the Jews will come from somewhere. And he hits her with that classic, perhaps you were made for such a time as this, which is on, it's in basically everybody's dorms here, at least all the girls. Anyways. So, she decides to hold a couple banquets. At the first banquet, it's for Haman and the king, and she invites them there to an exclusive banquet the next day between the three of them. From this first banquet, Haman leaves drunk, because again, everyone's drunk constantly, except for Esther and Mordecai. So he leaves, he sees Mordecai, and again, very rational man. He orders that a giant stake be put up to impale Mordecai, and he was going to kill him the next day because he needs permission. So that night, while Haman's like, Mordecai, the king can't sleep. So he has someone read aloud the Royal Chronicles, which, okay. And they happen to read the part about his life where Mordecai saved him, which naturally he forgot about because, I mean, people saving your life, forget about that all the time. So the next morning, after the king eventually sleeps, I assume, Haman comes and asks the king if he can kill Mordecai, and the king's like, no. Pulls an Uno reverse card out of his pocket, because I'm sure that was a thing back then, and he orders Haman to honor Mordecai publicly for saving the king's life. So Haman then has to lead Mordecai around the entire city, ordering everyone to praise him. Great. So now it's time for the second banquet, Esther's second banquet. And this is when Esther's like, haha, I'm Jewish. And she reveals that Haman's decree is meant to kill her, and also Mordecai, and also their family, and all of the other Jews. And the king's like, he's also very drunk at this point. So he decides that Haman should be impaled on the stake that he put up for Mordecai. Ironic. But that doesn't reverse the decree. And it's not within, and I'm not 100% sure why. I don't know the intricacies of ancient Persian royal decree structure. I don't understand everything, but it's not in the king's power to reverse a decree. So he orders Mordecai to write a counter decree that on the 13th of Adar, the Jews are ordered to fight back against anyone who tries to destroy them. And so the Jews are like, yay, we're not going to be killed. So they have like a bunch of banquets and parties and stuff. And at that point, Mordecai is elevated to the seat next to the king, which is pretty cool. So 13th of Adar comes, the Jews triumph very easily. They first destroy Haman's family and all their like partners in crime, and then they get permission to finish the job the next day. So this results in a ton of joy, which then leads to Esther and the king establishing an annual 2-day feast called Purim. Okay, Purim. I know how to say it in Hebrew, kind of. English is difficult. And this is to commemorate the deliverance from destruction. And the name Purim comes from the word for the dice used to decide the date that they were going to kill everyone. And that dice is called Pur. So, Purim. So, next, we hear about how great Mordecai is. He's elevated to be second in command, which, nice one, Mordecai. There is a really cool structure to the way all of this is framed. And the Bible Project does a much better job explaining it than I would, because they have like the fancy diagrams and like it's very well done. I highly encourage you to go watch that. We're going to be focusing more on Esther herself. That explains the entire story. One thing that you may notice, and this is something that I think is fascinating, there's zero mention of God. Like, at all. He's never brought up. Not even, like in Ruth, the narrator never brings him up. But in this, the characters don't either. Nobody talks about God. Which, the Bible Project states, or posits really, that might be an invitation from the narrator to examine the book and to examine how everything played out, to see how God was working. Because Mordecai just happened to be standing right there when he overheard the plot to kill the king. He just happened to have his cousin become the wife so that he could tell the coincidences are not coincidences. But again, the Bible Project video does a much better job. Go watch that. Trust me, it's great. So from Esther specifically, what do we learn? A lot. Again, I could go in on this. I won't for the sake of time. But similarly to Ruth, like we just talked about, we can see God doing incredible things without ever making his presence blatantly obvious in the moment. It's not like Moses where he's talking to Esther directly and is like, dude, do this thing. He doesn't ever directly talk to them. He's never named, but we can still see how everything panned out, and we can pretty blatantly tell that that's a God thing. So, to draw another parallel, similarly to Joanna, Esther had great privilege. Now, while she wasn't very rich, at least at first, after she was queen, she was. But at first, she wasn't very rich, but she was beautiful. She was gorgeous. Okay, that's why she was able to, like, demolish everyone else in this beauty pageant. Like, she was pretty. So she used that to position herself to save the Jews. Even though she probably wasn't 100% sure that's what she was doing at the time, she did. And it's similar to Joanna in the sense that Joanna had so much money and she didn't know at first what she was going to do with it, but it didn't go to her head. She didn't let herself become boastful and prideful, and neither did Esther with her beauty. And that's something that's really important. So now we're going to go back to our absolute favorite phrase. God qualifies the called. Esther probably didn't see herself to be in a position to save her entire race and religion at all, like ever. She was probably relatively poor. She was Jewish, which was heavily looked down upon at the time. It was a different era. Anyways, she was Jewish. She was poor. She was an orphan. She was being raised by her cousin, so she probably didn't have any older brothers either. That was the whole thing. Yet through a series of coincidences, she just happened to find herself in the absolute perfect position to save everybody. So naturally, again, as we see with all of the women, one of the most important lessons is to have faith. Esther could have been killed for talking to the king the way she did. She was honestly expecting to be killed. She was preparing herself to die for this. Because if she died, maybe she could still save everybody else. She didn't die, obviously. Good for her. She did eventually. But she showed such remarkable faith that God would see her through it and that this is what she was meant to do. And it paid off. So, that's Esther. I love Esther. She's fantastic. I say that with all of the women. They're just so cool. That's why I'm talking about them. Next week, we're talking about two women, Mary and Martha. Absolutely fascinating stuff there. Very excited for that. So I will see you guys next week. And I don't know what else to say. I was going to keep going and then